We are back on MorningLine. Thanks for joining us. You see, we just put up on the bottom of the screen there the number we were talking about earlier for the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. And it's a toll-free number. As we also heard earlier, Misty was talking about the text line as well, which is out there for young people who don't know how to dial a phone and talk on it, but text all the time. And that's, 741-741. And then TN is what you put in the message to know you're from the state of Tennessee. We had some folks that waited through the break to talk to you too, and both of them are with Tennessee Suicide Prevention Network. And let's go next to, I believe, Pat. All right. Hi, Pat. Good morning.
Hi. Good morning. I was just kind of thinking about the roots of suicide, and I thought about that it has like 3 prongs. One of them is hopelessness in the case of the singular suicide. The second one is, in the case of the murder-suicide, I think it's control and complete selfishness. And the third one, I believe, has to do with lifestyle. In the case of the chef who killed himself, I saw several segments where he talked about his lifestyle being very promiscuous, full of drugs and undisciplined lifestyle, et cetera, et cetera. And I started thinking, well, if you live that way, that can damage your health, physical and mental. And then if you do incur trauma, you might feel that there's no other hope for you, or you might not be strong enough or have the resolve to try to get better. So I think those are my perspectives. What are yours?
I think those are, I think that's great points. All of them, she said, as you both said, that there are all kinds of elements that come into play. And I think every single one she said there, yeah, by the way, the murder-suicides oftentimes with the children that I referred to, that was the result spanning of some kind of domestic.
Yeah.
Okay, but go ahead. I think she hit on 3 for sure.
She hit on 3, and I mean, hopelessness. I mean, Pat, you know a lot of things, so thank you for calling in. Definitely sort of helping us lead into other things we can talk about. But yeah, for sure, hopelessness, that's something we talk about constantly in all of our trainings. That lack of hope, whatever that might look like for an individual. And in terms of the murder-suicides, as she noted, that control, that selfishness perhaps, it could definitely, as you noted, lead from domestic violence issues, trauma.
Well,
right?
That almost tells me that he decided, I'm out of here, and I want to hurt my spouse so bad I'm taking your kids too.
It can, for sure.
Yeah.
And that's always a terrible situation.
Yes,
unfortunately, hearing more and more about that as we move forward. And then lifestyle, she touched on, I think that substance abuse, as we'd noted earlier, substance misuse is definitely, like I said earlier, that a huge correlation between that and that increased risk for suicide.
I'm wondering too, with increased risk, Kate Spade, Anthony Bourdain, 2 famous people, both from New York. There's no indication, unless I missed it, that they knew each other. I suspect that Anthony Bourdain became at some point aware that she had killed herself. I'm just guessing that completely, but I'm just wondering, we will not know the answer to this question, but can seeing other individuals, could that, he sees this, he's feeling the problems, and he goes, and that triggers it? Can that be a trigger? Or other people seeing that someone famous commits suicide, can that lead to an increase in suicides?
Die by. Yes.
Yes, die by. Gosh darn it, I'm sorry.
I'm going to annoy you
I'm
constantly.
sorry, keep doing it, keep doing it. I'm just showing you, that's why it's ingrained, and you're right. Okay.
But we saw, following the death of Robin Williams, there was a spike. Thank you.
Okay.
There was a spike in suicides following his death. And so that's why it's so important, and we're so glad that we're able to be here, and anybody that will talk to us, to be able to educate the media on how to talk about these sorts of issues. Always putting that lifeline number up there, always making sure that people know that text line number, because it can be triggering. I didn't know Anthony Bourdain, but I had a moment of, it was Anthony Bourdain. I've read all of his books, love his TV shows forever and ever, but having that moment, it can be triggering for a lot of folks.
And on top of that as well, so if you know someone who has died by suicide, your risk increases as well for attempting suicide.
Okay, I guess I've heard that. And you know, there were those stories where there were some of these high schools. I remember a few years back where there was a couple of students that started by dying by suicide, and then all of a sudden there was a rash of suicides occurring as other students saw this, and it's that impulse thing, I guess, right?
Well, and suicide contagion is real, like you see in the schools. We do a lot, we reach out to a lot of different schools who may have lost a student to suicide. We do that postvention with the school if they want us to come in across the state, and our different directors across the state, to be able to practice those best practices, because there are things that need to be done following a death by suicide, and there are things that do not need to be done that maybe might contradict what we might think we should do following a death by suicide. So being aware of that, following those best practices, and making sure that we pummel people with those resources, making sure everybody has that National Lifeline number in their phone.
Yeah, and that's exactly right. I'm wondering too, I have a teenage son, and I don't know your thoughts. I'm not asking you to be media critics, and I've watched some of it, but the controversy over that 13 Reasons show, is that, I forget what that's on. But
Netflix, yeah.
Yeah, Netflix, and he's watched it, and it became very popular, and I know part of the theme of that program has to do with suicide, and you know, and as I've watched it, I mean, I did not prohibit him from watching it or anything, and I just thought, you know, it depends on the kid and how they might take that, maybe?
I have a teenager as well.
Okay.
And so, and I'll be very honest about this, I have not seen the show.
Okay, and I haven't watched a lot, but I watched a little when I heard all the controversies, and I thought, oh, okay.
But I do know that as a mother and someone who works in this field, if I were to allow my daughter to watch this series, I would want to be there with her to help her understand, you know, what could have been done and why and what's leading up to this, and be able to explain it with her. And also going back to what you said, Nick, was coping skills. Coping skills are huge, and resiliency, right, to be able to kind of combat all of the risk factors. So we want to make sure our kids have protective factors that surround them, so that when they do encounter an adverse situation or an adverse thought, they have the coping skills and the resiliency to be able to work through it effectively and healthy.
Right.
Well,
and you know, the kids too, we've seen some cases where they've linked back the suicides to bullying. Right? I mean, we see that in the schools now, and some of these kids just repeatedly get bullied, and then the violence turns either to them dying by suicide, or sometimes they show up at the school with a gun. You know, and so I guess it's just having to be aware of what they're going through and watch for the warning signs. So again, the warning signs may be for, in general, I guess, is a radical change in behavior. All of a sudden, someone who's gregarious is all of a sudden real quiet, not going out anymore.
Departure from their norm.
Okay, departure from the norm, right.
I'm generally an introvert. I'm kind of a quiet person.
So if all of a sudden you get really loud and crazy.
Yes. There's something wrong with Joanne. What is this, right? And it's a departure from our normal. And everybody's sort of got their norm and looking at those departures. Of course, there are other warning signs: giving away those prized possessions. That ranges across age groups, across demographics.
Just giving things away all of a sudden that you know are prized by them. Why would you be giving this away? It's like
exactly. And so asking, right? Being like, hey, why are you giving this away? What's going on?
Someone say, what do they respond to that, you think? Now, why did you just give away your prized guitar? And someone would say, oh, I just don't think I need it anymore.
Exactly. Following up.
Then you say why, and they go, well, I just don't think I want to play anymore. But you love that. And then at that point, they're not going to come clean with you maybe yet on what they're really feeling. They might.
Perhaps they might. You know.
And if they don't, though, then you just, what do you do?
You stick with your gut.
Yeah.
So if your gut's saying, yeah, this person is contemplating harming themselves, then do you deal with them, or do you then you call yourself that hotline and say, look, I have this friend I'm really worried about?
You can.
And then what would they tell you? I mean, how do you say, well, you got to grab your friend and bring them in? Well, they're not going to come. You know, he or she doesn't want to do it.
So a couple things on what you said. The first thing I want to address, and we'll get back to how to, but you referenced harm. Are you thinking about harming yourself? So as we have been talking about things that you can do to help someone, there's things that you should not do as well. And so if you are curious if someone is thinking about suicide, don't ask them if they're thinking about harming themselves. Okay? And it's a very specific reason why. Someone who is thinking about suicide is already hurting. They're already in...
They're already harmed.
Right. They're already hurting. They, you know, it's very harmful for them. they're in a very dark place. And if you walk up to someone, may I use you, Joanne?
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. And you ask them, hey, are you thinking about harming yourself? Well, to someone who's suicidal, because they're already hurting, suicide to them is a way to end the pain. And so in their mind, it doesn't hurt to swallow pills.
Right.
They don't anticipate feeling anything from other lethal means.
Okay.
And so
what should the question be?
the question should be for adults. And a way you can ask is, I've noticed you haven't been yourself lately. I've noticed you've started isolating yourself. I've noticed you're not reading as much anymore. Sometimes when people do those XYZ activities, they may have thoughts of suicide. Is that something you're thinking about? And you want to be very genuine with the questioning. You don't want to show any type of judgment. You don't want to be like, hey, you're not thinking about suicide, right? You wouldn't do that. That's stupid. That you don't want to ask.
That's not going to help.
No, absolutely. And so verbiage is very, very important whenever we're talking about how do you ask someone. Now, for our younger children or our younger population, they may not understand the term suicide. However, in Tennessee, we have lost a 10-year-old to suicide. So whenever you're working with youth and the younger population, you can ask them, have you thought about going to sleep and not waking up? They may not understand the term suicide and truly what it means, but they can relate to the idea of going to sleep and not waking up. And so that's how you would ask a young person.
I'd forgotten that. Is that the youngest that we know of in Tennessee? Younger than 10 have committed suicide?
Died by
suicide? How young?
8.
An 8-year-old died by suicide. And
Yes.
wow, where did that child even get the concept of that? Or so how many die by suicide in the state of Tennessee every year?
2016 was our most up-to-date numbers, 1,110.
Okay, way
3
too
every
many.
day.
3 every day.
3 Tennesseans every day.
All right, we'll take a break on that note. Our final segment and more of your calls right after that. That's sobering. Wow, 3 every day.